Well, welcome everyone. We're so glad to have you. Welcome to the 36th Annual New York State Foster Care and Adoption Conference. Emily is kicking off the entire conference for us this morning. We're so glad to have her here. Um, the workshop that's going to be presented this morning over the next hour and a half is Attachment-Based Therapy, Overcoming Trauma and Improving Relationships. And today we're going to hear from Emily Collins, who will introduce herself in a moment. Before we begin, let me introduce myself. So I'm Renee Heddick, and I'm the Agape Director in Central New York with the Coalition, and I'm going to be the room moderator for today. Some housekeeping things to take care of very quickly. I want to remind everyone that training certificates are available for this conference. I will put links in the chat box at the end of the session. You can just click the link and it will take you to apply for a certificate of attendance and training. Please make sure that the name on the screen matches the name that you need on that certificate. If there are more than just one of you in your box, please go in and change the name to include both of you so that you can get certificates, please. If you don't know how to change your name, hover over your picture. There's three little dots in the upper right-hand corner. Click on those three dots and you will see it will say rename and just type in the name that you'd like. All right. At the end of the presentation, I'm going to put a link also in the chat box for you to fill out evaluations to let us know how we did. You can either fill it out after this workshop or fill it out at the end of the entire conference. It's up to you. We appreciate, right, that the topics in our conference can be emotional and can be triggering. Please lean into that, but also take care of yourself. We do ask that if you have questions, you put them into the chat box. And if they are pertinent to what Emily is talking about in the moment, I will politely interrupt her and ask the question. Otherwise, we'll answer all those questions at the end of the workshop. The other thing we wanted to remind you of is this workshop is being recorded. We ask that you respect each other's confidentiality and the confidentiality of your children. So as you bring questions to Emily, we please ask you not to use their names or any identifying information to ensure their confidentiality. All right. So with that, at this moment, I'm going to keep everybody on mute so that we can hear Emily, and I'm going to pass it along to Emily. So welcome, Emily. Glad you're here.
Thank you, Renee, and welcome everyone. Let me see if I can do this screen sharing thing. Oop, I think Renee, you have to, there we go. Okay. All right, excellent. Everyone can see that now? All right. So welcome everyone. Thanks so much for being here. I am very excited to be with you this morning and kicking off this AFF-CNY Annuals Conference. No pressure on me at all. I am going to be talking today about attachment-based therapy, overcoming trauma and improving relationships. Yep, and already I am having technical difficulties. Because I think, okay. There we go. All right, we got it. Okay, first off, who am I and why should you be interested in or listen to anything that I have to say? My name is Emily Collins. I am the Director of Clinical Services at You Gotta Believe. And for those of you who are not familiar with You Gotta Believe, we are an agency that was actually founded by the infamous Pat O'Brien, currently Executive Director of AFF-CNY. And our mission is to make sure, or our dream perhaps, is to see that no child ever ages out of foster care without being connected to a permanent, unconditionally committed parent. We know that the need for family does not end at age 18 or 21 when kids age out of foster care. So we train and support parents to adopt older youth out of foster care who might otherwise just be slated for independent living. And gosh, I think almost 15 years ago now, I became one of those parents. I was trained and licensed and certified through You Gotta Believe, and my son joined my family when he was 16 years old. He just turned 31 earlier this month. I'm not sure how that happened, especially since I'm only 29, so I don't, it's very strange. So I always approach all of this stuff with two hats, right? The first is as a clinician, and the second is as a parent who has, I got a real experiential education from my son that I did not get from any other professional experience that I had. And I had been working in foster care for a while before he joined my family. So currently, I am running the mental health department at You Gotta Believe, and hoping to share with you today some of the way that we work, some of the lessons that we have learned in this journey. So a little bit about our mental health program. The first thing to know is that we operate all of our services under this umbrella of sort of family focused, right? And really what this is sort of a rejection of the traditional model where the kid is labeled a problem, they are sent off to therapy, the therapist is supposed to fix them up, send them back home all shiny and new and not having temper tantrums anymore, or whatever the issue was that brought them to therapy, and everybody lives happily ever after again, right? Now, I don't know if that model works for any kids, but I 100% know it does not work for kids with a history of foster care and adoption, right? So we reject that model. We are not just working to fix a kid. We are working with whole families who are incorporating a new member into their unit. And that's a complicated thing. And there's a whole lot of dynamics there. And we are working with the entire family to help them with that adjustment and to help that family become a place that feels safe for every member of the family, and where children who have been hurt can heal and can grow. So that's thing number one. We're working with the family. And we are attachment-based and developmental trauma informed. So here again, we can see the importance of the family, right? If we're talking attachment, who am I looking for this child to attach to? I'm not looking for them to attach to me as the therapist. I'm not bringing them home, right? I'm looking for them to attach to the parent and to feel safe with the parent. And I can't do that if the parent isn't in the room with us. So again, that's another reason why we're family focused and developmental trauma informed. People have probably heard this phrase before, but if you are hurt in relationships, then you need to be healed within relationships, right? So family focused, attachment based, developmental trauma informed, and finally grant funded. Now I realize it may look like one of these things does not belong. Grant funded might seem like it's a different thing, but it is important. And I will get to that towards the end, and you will see why that's important. So why attachment based? Why is that our number one kind of the number one way that we're sort of defining what we do is attachment based? Why is that important? I am going to argue that attachment and adoption are intertwined and interconnected to a level that we cannot separate them out. And reason number one is because, by definition, every single adoptee has suffered an attachment disruption, which is the loss or interruption of a child's relationship with their primary caregiver or attachment figure. And this is true even if we have adoption from birth, because our very first attachment figure in life is the mother who carries us in her womb, right? We hear the heartbeat, we hear the voice, that we are literally physically attached to that person, right? So that's our very first attachment figure. So by definition, any adoption involves attachment disruption. And very frequently, almost always, it also involves attachment injury. The attachment injury, when I use that term, I'm referring to an emotional wound that occurs when an attachment figure fails to respond to our need for safety, comfort, or support during a critical moment. Now, no parent responds exactly perfectly to every need 100% of the time. That's not what we're talking about when we talk about attachment injury. What we're talking about is I am cold and hungry and in distress, and my parent is nowhere to be found. Or, I am in need of support. I approach my parent for something, and my parent physically harms me instead of providing support or help to me. Those are attachment injuries. And, we may have situations where, again, a child was adopted at birth and so didn't experience attachment injury necessarily, only the disruption. But if we're looking at kids who have a history of foster care, if we're looking at international adoptions where children may have been in an orphanage or a baby home, as one of my clients liked to call it, there absolutely have been attachment injuries. So if we're saying then that by definition, every child who has experienced foster care and or adoption has experienced attachment trauma, it is absolutely essential then for us to be attachment-based when we're looking at healing those wounds. So attachment theory. This is probably, I think attachment a lot of times is a word that everyone has heard, and we use it kind of to mean relationship, but we maybe don't really fully understand what is attachment theory, why is it important, what do we really mean when we use the word attachment. Attachment theory is a framework to help us understand how human beings connect and form emotional bonds with each other, and how the nature of our very earliest relationships with our first caregivers, when we are literally dependent on these people for our survival, right? How those earliest relationships set the stage, set the foundation for how we function throughout the rest of our lives. So that's why it's important, right? This is setting the stage for all kinds of functioning for the rest of our lives. Attachment theory was initially sort of developed by John Bowlby, often referred to as the father of attachment theory. He started his work in the 1940s and 50s. It was followed up then by Mary Ainsworth, other names. And here's the thing. Our knowledge and understanding of attachment theory continues to evolve and develop to this day. If people are familiar with names like Alan Shore, Dan Siegel, Deb Dana. These are all people who we are constantly studying and learning and understanding more about how attachment happens and how it impacts us throughout the rest of our lives. So just a couple of ways our attachment style impacts us. This sort of encompasses pretty much everything. How we see ourselves and how we see the rest of the world. Do we feel good about ourselves? Is the world safe? Is the world not safe? Our capacity for emotional regulation, right? Can we manage our emotions? Can we, handle really big, strong emotions? What happens when that comes up for us? Our behaviors, our go-to coping mechanisms, right? What is it that we go to? What behaviors and coping mechanisms do we go to when our emotions start feeling really big? And obviously, of course, our relationships with other people. What do those relationships look like? So, it's a little bit important, attachment. So the attachment experts have identified 4 attachment styles. The first is secure, and then we have insecure avoidant, insecure anxious, and disorganized. And I'm going to go through each of these styles, how they develop, what they look like. The first is secure attachment. So when we've got a caregiver who is consistently attuned, responsive to our needs, reliable, we can count on them, that is when a secure attachment forms. And the child develops this core belief of, I am lovable and others are trustworthy, right? So baby cries, mom comes. Baby's hungry, baby gets fed. Baby starts realizing, this world is okay, right? If I've got a need, it's probably going to get met. Not always 100% immediately. Again, that is impossible. And we're not looking for, the parent who is hovering over the baby and immediately providing for every single need. That, in fact, would not be so great. But more often than not, needs get met reliably, caregiver is responsive, baby gets the sense, I'm lovable, I'm worthy, people care about me, and I can count on other people. So then what do we see? If you're looking at little kids, what they see is sort of this balance between going out and exploring the world, coming back to caregiver for a little, reassurance, refueling, mom's still here, I'm safe, okay, I can go back out and explore again, right? They will grow to be people who are comfortable with closeness. They can have close relationships. They can express how they feel to other people. They've got flexible emotional regulation skills, right? Developmentally age appropriate, but generally have good regulation skills, able to use others for co-regulation when that's needed, right? They're comfortable reaching out for help when they need help. Feel good about themselves, pretty positive self-esteem, capable of empathy for other people, right? They can do that perspective taking, see things from somebody else's point of view. And then as adults, if you ask someone who has a secure attachment style to tell the story of their life, it's coherent. It has a beginning, middle, and end. They can make sense of things, they can explain things that have happened, and you can understand that story that they tell. So secure attachment has been related to really better mental health, better social relationships, all kinds of positive things that we want. Secure relationship facilitates those things. Unfortunately, not every parent is able to be consistently reliable and attuned with their kid, right? So when we have a parent who is emotionally distant or unavailable or sort of rejecting, especially if the kid expresses any needs, then we get an insecure avoidant attachment style. And the core belief for the child is I can only rely on myself. I cannot count on other people meeting my needs. I gotta go it alone. I gotta do it myself. Now, often these kids with these caregivers will get their basic needs met as long as they sort of keep quiet and don't make too many demands, right? They'll get fed, they'll get, kind of their basic needs met. But if they go and ask for things, if they voice needs, then those needs don't get met, they get rejected. It may feel like it's too much for the caregiver to meet those needs. And so the kid learns to sort of shut down any sense that they need anything. And their strategy for getting their needs met becomes, if I don't ask for much, if I don't seem like I need anything, if I figure things out mostly on my own, I'm probably going to be okay. So when we have a kid with an insecure avoidant attachment, what we're going to see is what looks like a high level of independence. Now, I want to be very careful about painting that as a really positive thing, right? Like, oh, it's great, this kid's independent, they don't need anyone. Hopefully we here sort of know that really the goal in life is not independence, it's interdependence, right? To be able to have healthy relationships with others, not to just not need others. But this kid will look very independent, and they're going to do a whole lot more going out and exploring, and not a whole lot of coming back to get comfort or reassurance from the caregiver, right? And in fact, they're not really all that comfortable with any level of closeness or vulnerability. They're not going to ask for help. They're going to avoid making demands not only of their caregiver, but really of anyone, right? So even as adults, they may not ask for help. They may, still have that sense of like, I'm doing it on my own. There's a real denial of their own needs, don't feel comfortable being close and vulnerable with others. I'm just going to sort of figure stuff out on my own. As an adult, if you ask someone with insecure avoidant attachment to tell the story of their life, they're going to be missing a lot of details. There are going to be sort of large gaps in that story. And they probably also will tell you like, everything was fine, right? They have learned to deny their needs and not rely on other people to get those needs met. So when they remember as a kid not getting needs met, that just seems like fine. Everything was fine, right? But it's not going to be a full story. If we've got a caregiver who is inconsistently available, sometimes I'm there, sometimes I'm not there, often like really preoccupied with stuff other than the child, now we're going to get an insecure, anxious attachment. And this kid learns, I'm not enough, and others might abandon me. So this is the kid that feels like I've got to work really hard to avoid being abandoned and to stay in relationship with my caregiver. So this kid learns to be sort of loud and demanding about their needs, to be sure that they're not getting forgotten, they're not getting left, overlooked, abandoned, right? I got to make sure you know I'm here. I'm always reminding you that I'm here. Don't forget about me. Don't forget about me. Look at me. And that's how they have learned to get their needs met. Because if they don't have that hyper higher level of energy that is working to like pull the caregiver in, the fear is they're going to be overlooked and abandoned, right? So this is sort of the opposite of the avoidant, right? They've got a very low energy, don't call attention to myself. That's how I get my needs met. Here we've got really high energy, always call attention to myself. And that's how I get my needs met. So here, as you might expect, we've got less exploring and more sticking real close to the caregiver, right? Interestingly, though, whereas a securely attached kid will come to the caregiver and be soothed by the caregiver's presence, the insecure, anxious child needs that proximity to the caregiver, can seem really clingy, but doesn't seem soothed by the caregiver's presence, right? They can't quite relax into a sense of, I'm going to get taken care of. So even when they're close and clingy, they still are not soothed. They are looking for constant reassurance of relationship, right? If you know the people who are always like, are you mad at me? Are we okay? Did I do something? Why didn't you answer my text? What if it? These are the insecure anxious. I'm checking. Is that relationship still there? Is it still there? Because if I don't check, I might lose it while I'm not looking, right? If you ask an adult with insecure, anxious attachment to tell their life story, there's going to be a whole lot of emotion, right? There's a lot of feelings, but there's not a whole lot of logical coherence. It may not follow a timeline or feel like this logically comes after that. It's just all a lot of like feelings. And then lastly, we've got the disorganized attachment style. And this is actually the most common attachment style in populations with early childhood maltreatment. We get disorganized attachment when we have a caregiver who is frightening, abusive, severely neglectful. They are both the source of terror for a child, but also the source that the child needs to get their needs met, right? So here, when we've got, an abusive caregiver, what the child learns is, I am not lovable. I don't belong anywhere. And other people are not safe. And the world is not safe. And we call this disorganized attachment because there is no organizing principle that this kid can use to get their needs met, right? So we saw the organizing principle of keep it low key, get your needs met. High, keep it high key, get your needs met. This kid is not sure, right? Do I want to approach the caregiver? Do I want to avoid the caregiver? Different things are safe at different times and dangerous at other times. And there's no organizing plan for how can I get my needs met from this very frightening, scary, dangerous person. So here we see, again, they're caught between approaching or avoiding the caregiver. And what this can look like is sort of being frozen, right? If I'm not sure if I'm going towards or moving away from, then I'm kind of stuck in place. A lot of really unpredictable behaviors. Because again, there's no organizing plan, right? So it just becomes very unpredictable, very controlling. If the environment and the world and people are unsafe, well, I am going to control things as tightly as I possibly can, everything that I can possibly control to try and ensure my safety, right? Real poor emotional regulation skills. We will see the explosive sort of outbursts, but also this dissociation, kind of fading away, withdrawal. Kids might be more likely to, they might gravitate towards one of those more than the other, or you may see both of them in the same kid at different times, right? And if you ask an adult with a disorganized attachment style to tell their life story, it makes no sense. It is all jumbled up, it's disorganized, we're mixing past and present, we're not telling any kind of coherent story. They're sort of all over the place. And this again, right, we see this very frequently with kids with histories of foster care and adoption. So luckily, for anyone who did not start life out with a consistently attuned, responsive caregiver and who did not start life out with a secure attachment style, there is something termed earned secure attachment. And what this tells us is it is never too late. If we've got an insecure, anxious attachment style, we don't need to just go, oh, that's that. That's just how that person is going to be for the rest of their life, right? We can work towards and create a more secure attachment style. We just need two things. The first is we need a significant emotional relationship with a stable person with whom a secure attachment can form. Now, for this audience, for this presentation, we're probably talking about the foster adoptive parent, right? However, people have earned secure attachment later in life by having a partner who becomes a secure attachment figure. So, it's not always that it needs to be kind of a second parent figure that can do this. But again, for purposes of this workshop, we're probably looking at you, adoptive and foster parents, that you are going to get to be that stable person that your child can form a secure attachment with. And then the other is this opportunity to make sense of their story. To create a coherent story about what happened to me. And being able to create that story does not mean that what happened is okay, but it means that what happened makes sense. And there is something about us as human beings that when things make sense, we can deal with them. And I imagine that if you think about things in your own life, you may be able to think of an example of a time when something really bothered you, when it didn't make sense, and then you figured it out and it made sense, and you were like, oh, okay, well, I can handle that. I can manage that, right? So that's how we get to earned secure attachment. All right, now I imagine we've all been thinking about our kids as we talk about attachment style, right? But guess what, parents? You are not off the hook. Your attachment style matters too, because your attachment style is impacting how you see yourself in the world and how you behave and cope with things and how you have relationships, including the relationship with your child, right? So it's really important for parents to give some thought to their attachment style and how that impacts their parenting. And then not only that, here's a fun game. And I am going to invite people to unmute and speak up if you have thoughts or answers. But let's take a minute to imagine what might happen if we have a parent with an insecure, anxious attachment style, right? So someone who needs a lot of reassurance about relationship, someone who is like, really makes their presence known and is, kind of always working for closeness and reassurance in a relationship. And they are parenting a child who has an insecure avoidant attachment style. And remember, that's the kid who's like, I got this. I don't need anybody else. I can do this on my own. I don't have any needs. No, there's nothing you can do for me. I'm good. Thoughts from anyone about what that might look like?
if you want to think about block trust, it looks like a recipe for block trust, because you're clinging more and more, give me more, and your child is running in the other direction. And I know for me that turns into resentment, anger, and leave me alone. You want to be on your own, you're on your own then.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. Thank you, Chester. And hello. Welcome. Glad you're here. So absolutely, right? We're going to have a parent who is like chasing after this kid, and the kid is going, whoa, back up. Leave me alone. And then, yeah, the parent starts going, well, this kid doesn't want to have a relationship with me. This kid doesn't want to be in this family. Why, I'm thinking about the parents that I work with where kids are still in foster care or at the pre-adoptive phase, right? And they start going, this kid doesn't want to be adopted. Like, you told me this kid wanted to be in a family. It's not acting like it. It's not making any effort to have a relationship, right? Maybe we just disrupt. Maybe we don't bother going through with this. This doesn't feel good. If we take a step back, right? And if we can,
Emily,
go ahead, Renee.
Janet was going to jump in. Just going to give Janet some space here. Go ahead, Janet.
Please do.
Yes, hi Emily. This is so super interesting because as a parent of a 19-year-old, I find myself just like what Chester said just now, to the point where I threw my hands up in the air, and on the other hand, I don't feel that I'm getting the support because I am fighting this kid, and there are times when he wants to get close, but whenever he finds himself kind of like getting emotional, he immediately shuts down. And so he's like all over the place. And even this morning, I had an experience where I'm saying, hey, listen, all you need is 15 more credits. I begged and I pleaded, and I'm like, can we do this together? And he would say yes. And then all of a sudden he runs east. So where do you go with your emotions with this? Because I feel like I'm losing this kid, but I'm terrified of losing this kid because there are times when, I see him kind of opening up and has a need, but as soon as he starts to speak, and I'm a listener, but then all of a sudden something snaps in him and he shuts down, he walks away, and he's kind of like distant.
Yeah. Yeah. Janet, thank you so much for sharing that. I'm wondering if what you've got is a disorganized attachment style on your hands, because this feels like, just from the little bit that you're saying, a kid who wants to connect, right? And so he's like, oh, I'm going to approach. And then he starts getting that connection from you. And then he's like, oh, whoa, that's terrifying. Oh, now I'm backing off. That's too scary. Because part of his brain is still saying to him, other people aren't safe. If you are close with people, they're going to hurt you. So you got to watch out. And it is, as parents, it is incredibly painful, especially when you've got a kid and you're sort of watching them self-destruct, right? And to feel like, I'm trying everything I can think of to get this kid on a good path and to help them. And, everything I do, they're just sort of like pushing me away. And I think, again, this is something that does not necessarily make it better, but may help it make sense. That my guess is this kid learned something that was a legitimate truth at one point in his life, that other people are dangerous. And it's very, very scary now for him to allow closeness with anyone, because his brain is telling him, get away, you're going to get hurt. Yeah.
And that is true, because he did mention to me, he's only been with me for a year, but initially he didn't speak. It's not until about maybe 4 or 5 months ago that he really started opening up. And his first statement was, I don't trust people, and I was told never to trust anybody. Nobody's ever been there for me. So me trying to be there, it makes him uncomfortable, I guess.
Yep.
And so he doesn't know how to deal with that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
I think you're exactly
you
right.
know, and I find myself, oh God, I so desperately want him to succeed that sometimes I just back myself. Like this morning, I said, I'll go for a drive because I can't, I didn't know what else to say to him.
Yeah. 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 And again, I think, that is very telling. He was able to say to you, I don't trust anyone. And he's been with you for such a short period of time, right? Here's the other thing about attachment-based therapy. It is not short-term work. This
Yeah.
is, kids have to have, if he's got a whole filing cabinet full of experiences that say, don't trust, don't trust, don't trust, and you have put, one or two pieces of paper into that filing cabinet that say, you can trust me,
Right.
well, I got a whole filing cabinet here that says I can't. What's that one or two pieces of paper mean to me, right? There's going to have to be a
Right.
whole lot more paper in there that says I am trustworthy before it outweighs the rest of the paper in there that says don't trust. And that is a tough, tough job. I wish that in this workshop I had the magic formula for everyone that was going to tell you how all of your children were immediately going to form a secure attachment with you and everything was going to be fabulous from here on out. And I regret to inform you that I do not have that. It is, it's time. A lot of it is time, for sure. Antoinette, you've got your hand up?
Yeah, she said a number of things that, I had to learn myself, and I find it important. And not only for myself and with my children, but I work as a family advocacy specialist. So I'm working with other families. And the hardest thing for me to do when I talk to a parent and I see what you're saying, one of the things is I often tell them it's not going to be fixed overnight. It's not going to happen. You're trying to undo, in her case, 19 years of what he has experienced. And the other thing was getting them, and maybe you have some insight on how we speak to this when we speak to families, getting them to understand that you got to look at the base of where this is coming from, and that's understanding their trauma.
Yeah.
And I talked to another family about that. You got to understand that this is a behavior. Not only has it been in, because these are people who are taking care of teenagers. This is,
Mhm.
and like I said, they've been, whatever it is, whether 16, 18, 19, that's what they have experienced for some period of time. And how do you tell a parent that they need to really, really focus on the trauma and not the behavior? And that may sound strange, but I feel like if they understand what happened, they not that's going to help fix them, but it'll help them better deal with it.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
that's where I need a little help getting them to understand that.
Yeah, yeah. Antoinette, I think that is a whole other training, but it is a very
Okay,
good question.
we'll
And I
talk.
think, and again, it does come down to a lot of it to understanding how these really early life experiences lay that foundation, right? And just because you move a kid from one location to another location, their brain is still their brain, their nervous system is still their nervous system, their attachment style is still their attachment style, right? Those things don't spontaneously change just because we've changed the environment. And so, again, it doesn't always make it better, but it might help it make sense when we say, here is what this kid experienced, and here is how that's impacting them. And, kind of like I was saying at the beginning, there is no way to just take that kid and fix him up and send him back shiny and smiley, right? This is a whole family endeavor to kind of help this kid heal. And sometimes that's what I focus on with parents is the behavior is the symptom, right? We want to heal the cause. So if I go to the doctor with a cough, right? Or, okay, scratch that. My kid has a cough. right? And it's a super annoying cough. I mean, night and day, constant, loud, keeping everybody in the house awake. I have this really annoying cough, okay? And I want this cough to stop. I can probably pour enough cough syrup into this kid that they're gonna stop coughing, right? Have I cured anything? What if that cough is coming from tuberculosis? Well, there's still a disease process happening. Even if I can get the cough to stop, my kid is not healed. So I need to go, okay, where is this cough coming from? Okay, it's tuberculosis. All right, well, what's the treatment for tuberculosis? Okay, long-term antibiotics. It might take longer for the cough to go away that way, but it will go away. As the kid heals, as we treat that TB, the cough is going to go away. And so that sometimes is how I talk with families about, like, I know you want that cough to go away. And you know what? I want that cough to go away too. Nobody wants your kid to be coughing for the rest of their lives, right? But we got to heal what's underneath. And then the cough will go away, right? On its own, once we've healed what's underneath. So I don't know if that's helpful at all, but that's kind of the metaphor that I use at times. So when we're doing attachment-based therapy, we are looking at the parent's attachment style, the kid's attachment style, the match between the two, right? And helping parents understand that that kid who is pushing you away and refusing to listen to you, it's not because they don't like you. It's not because they are trying to personally insult you. It's because those early life experiences set the stage for how they interact with other people, whether they trust, whether they don't. And that our goal has got to be to start working towards earned, secure attachment. And, you know, from the story Janet was telling us, it sounds like we've got a stable attachment figure there, right? She's ready. She's like, I'm here. I'm going to be here for this kid. I'm really committed and I want to see him be successful, right? So then the job becomes, how do we, first of all, it's just time, right? It's going to take a while. And then how do we help this kid understand how his early experiences impacted his attachment style, how he sees himself, how he sees the world, how he sees others. And, you know, can we help him slowly over time let Janet in a little bit more and feel safe with it? Again, not short-term work, not short-term work. And Antoinette mentioned the trauma also, right? Okay, now I'm having technical difficulties again. There we go. Okay, so developmental trauma informed. Why are we developmental trauma informed? First, I want to really make a difference, a distinction, right, between trauma and developmental trauma. Okay. Trauma could be an adult experiencing a very traumatic event, and that can have enormous impact on the adult and on the adult's lives, right? No minimization at all of the impact of trauma experienced as an adult. But when trauma is experienced as a tiny baby and as a very young child whose brain is still in development, now we've got that trauma impacting the very developmental systems of the child, right? Physically, the way their brain develops, all of their beliefs about themselves and the world. And that is a different thing than somebody who already has, you know, kind of developed their beliefs about the world and their brains formed, et cetera, and then they experience a trauma. So we want to be very clear that with kids with early childhood maltreatment, what we're really looking at is developmental trauma. people may or may not be aware, but developmental trauma disorder was proposed as an official diagnosis, but not accepted as an official diagnosis. So this is not in, the magical DSM-5. However, Bessel van der Kolk, a name that people might know, who is, big in the trauma world, and a number of his colleagues and other supporters wrote up and developed proposed criteria for this diagnosis of developmental trauma disorder. And in those proposed criteria, they highlighted 3 categories of dysregulation that form when we're talking about developmental trauma. The first is affective and physiological dysregulation. So that's dysregulation of the emotions and the body, right? So you might see a kid who doesn't recognize when they're hungry, may get real cranky and hangry, and it turns out they haven't eaten all day, right? But the physiological signs that they're hungry, that they're thirsty, that they're tired, that they need to use the restroom, those things don't register always. And then of course, dysregulation of the emotions, right? Where emotions are all over the place. They really can't regulate and manage how they're feeling. The second category is attentional and behavioral dysregulation. So if you spend any time at all working with youth in the foster care system, you will figure out pretty quickly that almost all of them have a diagnosis of ADHD, right? There is a real attentional dysregulation that comes up with that early childhood trauma. And, if you've got a kid who has learned that their attention needs to be constantly scanning the environment and looking for danger, right, in order to keep themselves safe, well, when they're sitting in math class, they're not just focusing their attention on the teacher at the front of the classroom who's writing on the board, right? They're looking all over the place all the time. Their attention is sort of all over the place. And same with behavior, right? Very hard for them to keep, to have good behavioral control, manage their impulses, all that kind of stuff. And then that last category is self and relational dysregulation. So that is how I feel about myself. Do I have kind of a consistent view of who I am and what I'm worth? And dysregulation in relationships with others, right? How do I engage in relationships with other people? How can I feel safe doing that? So the language of developmental trauma is different than the language, some of the language of attachment. But I'm going to argue that the areas of injury, and so the areas that need healing, are actually the same when we look at both of these things, right? So we talked about how attachment impacts how we see ourselves and how we see the world. And in developmental trauma, we talk about dysregulation of self-image, right? In attachment, we talk about how it impacts the ability to regulate emotions. And also in developmental trauma, we see dysregulation of emotion. In attachment, we talk about how our attachment style impacts our behavior and our coping mechanisms. And with developmental trauma, we've got dysregulation of behavior. Attachment impacts our relationships with others. And with developmental trauma, we've got dysregulation of those relationships. So in fact, we're looking at sort of the same things. And I think it's possible to look at developmental trauma through an attachment lens. Because really, when we're talking about developmental trauma, what we're talking about, right, is generally abusive, neglectful caregivers, environments, and we can look at those as attachment injuries, which we talked about at the very beginning, right? That when the person you're relying on for care and support and safety instead hurts you, is unavailable, is rejecting, etc., is abusive, is neglectful, that's attachment injury. So again, I think, I am not saying here that we don't need to understand anything about developmental trauma, but I am saying that I think developmental trauma and attachment very intertwined, right? Okay, so now we come to this last point, that we're grant funded. Why does this make a difference? Well, if anyone has ever been involved with grant funded programs or getting grants or knows anything about grants, you might know that one thing that people who give you a whole lot of money want to know is, how you spending my money? How can you prove to me that you are spending that money wisely? And often what they're going to ask about is, what are your outcomes? How can you show us that this money was well spent? So in developing our program and looking at the grants that we got and are depending on to continue to exist, we had to start asking these questions of, how do we measure healing and growth? What does that look like? And how can we quantify it, right? It's very, very difficult to turn human beings into numbers. Human beings are complex and individual, and it's very difficult to say, what is the one thing that we can measure that is going to show that people have healed and grown, and it was because of the services that we provided? And oftentimes we fall into this trap, right? We're looking at compliance. We feel like, yes, the desired outcome of mental health services is behavioral compliance. I will know that therapy has worked when my kid starts following the rules, when my kid stops getting into fights at school, whatever it is, right? So I'm sure everyone here will be shocked and amazed to find that I reject the idea that behavioral compliance is how we know therapy has been successful. I'm going to propose it's connection. I am going to propose that we know healing is happening when people are able to form healthy and stable connections. And just to prove to you that I'm not basing this solely on my own little brain, I've got a quote here from Deb Dana, who says, "Connection is the antidote to the isolation that trauma creates. Through connection, we find safety, support, and the possibility of healing." Great, I understand 100%. How the heck do we measure that? How do we turn that into numbers? So we did a whole lot of exploring and researching and trying to find an answer to this question. And eventually, what we landed on was using social emotional learning ladders. We worked with Seed Impact, which is a program that does consulting services for nonprofits. And we're introduced to the concept of social emotional learning ladders. And there are 3 categories in this social emotional learning model: being, doing, and relating. And in each category, there is, we can envision it as a ladder where we've got a top rung, which is where we want to help people get to. And people might start at different points in the ladder, but our goal is to help them move towards the top of the ladder in each of these areas. Now, I imagine this sounds a little bit like abstract and gobbledygook, so let's drill down into some of the details, okay? If we're looking at attachment, the being category is the way we see ourselves and the world. And the doing category is emotional regulation, behavior, coping skills, and then that relating ladder is about relationship with others. And from a developmental trauma perspective, being is the dysregulation of self-image. Doing is the dysregulation of behavior, dysregulation of emotions, and relating is the dysregulation of relationships. So being is how do I feel about myself, see myself. Doing is what skills do I have, what am I capable of doing, and then relating is how can I connect with other people. We then translated this, we took a look at like, okay, using these ladders, who are we measuring, how, etc. We came up with then 7 ladders. Under being, parent confidence and youth confidence. Under doing, parent skills and youth skills. And under relating, parent connection, youth connection, and then a whole family ladder of family adjustment. Now, I am not going to go through the nitty-gritty of each of these ladders because that is not what I think is useful here. But what I do want to do is look at how did we define sort of what growth and healing looks like in each of these areas so that we know what we're looking for. So we fill out a ladder. There is both the therapist report and the self-report from the parent. We fill out a ladder for each parent that we work with, each youth that we work with, and then one for the whole family. And here's what we're looking at. For parent confidence, the goal is to get the parent to a place where they feel competent and capable of being a good parent. They know they're not perfect, right? They're going to make mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes, but they can forgive themselves when they make a mistake. They don't get, lost in a shame spiral that doesn't, say to them, oh, I messed up. I knew I couldn't do this. I'm a terrible parent. Instead, they go, okay, I'm not perfect. I made a mistake. I can forgive myself and I can repair and move on. For parent skills, we want our parents to be able to view their child's behavior through that lens of trauma and attachment, to really understand where it's coming from, and then be able to consistently use therapeutic parenting skills in response to those attachment and trauma-based behaviors. And then for connection, for the parent to really fully claim the child as part of their family, to really feel like this is my child. And so that's always what we are aiming for in therapy. Now that might look different for every parent, right? You might have 2 parents in the same family for whom it looks different for. They're going to be at different stages. One family may be like, yep, one parent may be all in. Yep, I have fully claimed this kid. I don't understand their behavior at all, and I'm not sure I'm doing a great job as a parent, but that's my kid, right? Another parent might not be there yet. Might be like, I don't know if we want to move forward with adoption for this kid. I'm not sure. So we're going to have different goals for each of those, but the goals always are in service of getting us to a place where the parents feel competent and capable of being good parents. They understand the behavior through a lens of trauma and attachment and consistently use therapeutic parenting, and they have fully claimed the child as part of their family. For youth, under youth confidence, we are looking for kids to show curiosity about their own behaviors and motivations. Often, and I imagine this will sound familiar to some of you, often our kids come to us with this idea that I'm just bad, or I'm crazy. Because that's the message that they've gotten through most of their lives, right? We want to help them move towards a place where they can be curious about themselves. Well, why is it that I have such a hard time staying in my seat at school? If I've always just thought it was, because I was bad. But if it's not because I'm bad, then why is it? And as they become curious about themselves, about their history, as we help them to be able to tell a cohesive story about their life so that what happened to them makes sense and they can see themselves as reacting to things that happened to them rather than as just bad or crazy. And then when they make mistakes, they don't descend into shame, which is so often what happens for these kids, right? They can't tolerate any suggestion that they have done something wrong because it just sends them into this shame spiral. But instead, they feel good about themselves to the point where they can respond to mistakes by making amends, right? It's okay. I made a mistake. I can fix it. I don't have to feel terrible about myself. For skills, we want them to be able to recognize and advocate to get their own needs met. And think about the avoidant kid who is like, what needs? Right? I'm gonna go at my own. We want them to be able to say, like, actually, I think I have a need here, and I'm gonna ask for help in getting it met. I'm gonna be able to rely on somebody else. And generally able to regulate their emotions, their behavior, and their attention. And then for youth connection, we want them to really be able to seek out and maintain close and connected relationships with others, and that those relationships are characterized by reciprocity. There's give and take, right? And mutual enjoyment. It's not just one-sided, one person using another person. There's reciprocity and mutual enjoyment. And then for family adjustment, what we're looking for is family reactions are generally positive. There's repairs taking place when necessary. Family members feel safe with each other. They feel connected. And the family functions as a single unit. It's not like the family and then the kid over there doing their own thing. And the family norms have actually shifted to include the youth and their needs. So instead of just saying, you're going to come into our family and fit into this family that we already have formed, no, you come into our family and all of us shift and adjust to create a new unit where everybody's needs are considered and met. So again, we've got these ideal images, right, of what does health look like. And then we can look at where is each member of the family, where are they right now on this ladder, on the way towards reaching that place of health. And that we can quantify. They are, they're at 1. They're not there at all. They're at 3. They're on their way, right? And over time, we can see people move up. And again, I'm not sharing I'm not going over the nitty gritty of the tool, but each step on the ladder has a description so that we can look and see where is this person currently on the ladder, and then we can show them moving. So again, the point of this is we're not looking at, did the kid stop getting into fights at school? Now, we are anticipating that as the kid moves up the ladder and as the parents move up the ladder and as the family moves up the ladder, we're going to get to a point where the kid's not getting into fights at school anymore because they're feeling safer, they're able to ask for what they need, they've got better, emotional and behavioral regulation. So we're going to get there. But if we're just focusing on, we got to stop the kid from fighting in school, we might be able to make that happen, right? But has healing and growth happened? Or have we just stopped one behavior that likely is just going to show up in another way someplace else, right? So again, this is all about kind of what are we really looking for? What is health and growth with these kids, and how do we get there? And I think the therapists appreciate having this tool as well, because when we're talking about goals, it's easy to get lost in chasing those behaviors, right? Well, mom is complaining about, kid refuses to do chores. So we're going to work on trying to get the kid to do the chores. But then 2 months later, well, now mom is complaining the kid never takes a shower. So we're going to try to, you can easily get caught up in kind of chasing these individual symptoms when we know the larger picture is we've got to heal the attachment wounds. We've got to be moving towards secure attachment, and we've got to be working on healing the damage from the developmental trauma that a kid experienced. All right, so we've still got like 18 minutes, so plenty of time. If people have questions, comments, open for anything.
Yeah, thank you so much, Emily. Yeah, please just open up your mic, have a conversation. Go ahead, Antoinette.
Yeah, I want to ask a question. When you have one of the things with the foster parents deal with, and I have a family that's dealing with that, is when you have teenagers and there's certain compliances that you have to make, with the agencies. And that sometimes, what you're saying about how we have to, give this process time. And in some instances, you're pressured to make this kid perform, and it's extremely difficult. And I don't know what you recommend in terms of how you balance that, where on the one hand, you still continue to try to build this relationship with the child or the attachment to the child. But on the other hand, you do have an obligation to try to get the child to comply.
Yes. Yeah. Antoinette, I'm going to try to avoid getting on my soapbox about the system. Because
Now, you don't want me to get started, I know.
I imagine you and I could have quite the conversation about that. And look, unfortunately, we're not going to resolve all of the issues that exist in the system, right? There are some pieces that, we've got to just, I don't know, try and deal with the best that we can. I think that, I tend to do a lot of like trying to advocate and explain. The truth is, though, there are some things that we do need to have happen, right? Some of them I think we can push back against a little bit. Like if the kid doesn't come to their, what are they calling them these days? PYA?
Mm.
ILS, independent living, I don't know.
The independent living, yeah.
There we go, yeah. If they don't attend their ILS groups, is that the worst thing in the world? Maybe we're just not going to be able to get them there. On the other hand, if they are, engaging in behavior that's really dangerous, or if they're refusing to ever go to the doctor, they haven't seen a doctor in, over a year or something. There's other things that it's more like, okay, we really do need to put our energy into this. We've only got so much energy. So there are things that I will push back against and say, like, that's just not going to happen. But I get, and especially for foster parents, you push back too much and they're like, well, you're not a foster parent for us anymore, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think that this question is really more about the inadequacies of the system than anything else. But here's what I will say. If parents are able to focus as much as possible on the relationship building. And if we put the
Yeah.
bulk of our energy into the relationship building, we will be more likely to be able to get some compliance on those things that we really need to get the compliance on. It's not a guarantee,
Right.
but it's more likely. I had a trainer one time explain it like this, which I use all the time. You gotta constantly be putting deposits into the relationship bank, because one day you're gonna want to cash a check. And if you haven't put in enough money, that check is gonna bounce, right? So if every single day we are working on putting as many deposits as we can into that relationship bank, then when we need the kid to do something and we come to them, we gotta cash this check now, there's gonna be enough money in the account for us to be able to do it. They're gonna say like, okay, we've built up enough of a relationship.
Yeah, that makes sense. It goes back to that, the building the attachment.
Yep.
And that does make a, but it's it's balancing that act.
I know. Yep. Once again, I wish I had a simpler and
No, I think that,
more curative answer for you, but
no, I
Along
think
those-
that's good.
I'm sorry, Internet. Go ahead.
No, I was just saying, I think that's good. That's good.
Along those same lines, Emily, I love that too, deposits in the relationship bank. Along those lines, you had a slide up earlier about earned stable attachment,
earned secure attachment. Yes.
unsecure attachment. I was wondering if you could flip back to that. Are we going to get these slides, by the way?
Yes.
Okay.
These will be, there is like a way for me to upload them onto the AFF-CNY
That would be
site,
great.
right? So people
Because
can get
I'd
them.
like you to just spend a couple of moments, kind of briefly running through that. I'm not the whole thing, obviously, but just because sometimes the struggle is helping our folks appreciate how much progress they've already made. You're so caught up in today's crisis that you're not even seeing the fact that there's been a huge change from 6 months ago,
Yeah.
2 years ago.
Yeah.
So if
Yeah.
you could run through that real quick, significant emotions.
Sure. Absolutely. And Chester, your comment about sometimes you get so caught up in the crisis du jour. I mean, that again, it's how are we looking at things, right? Because, and I think the ladders that I was talking about kind of help us in that area too, that we can go, yes, there was just a big crisis, right? But when there was that crisis, the parent responded in a different way. The kid recovered from the crisis quicker than they have in the past. The kid was able to make amends after whatever it is that like we may be able to identify. I know this crisis felt terrible, but let's look at this crisis versus the crisis he had 6 months ago. I'm working with a family now who did just have a big crisis. And, one of the things that got said during the crisis was, something about like, we've done all this work in therapy and now we're right back at square one because of what you did, ruined everything. However, when we as a family were able to take a look at it, we recognized that's not actually true. In that moment, it felt that way. But in fact, the family was able to reach out for help when it happened, B, process, and the parents were able to go like, here's how that made me feel, and here's what I think is actually going on for my kid, and so I can respond to that, and really came together again much more quickly, and it didn't linger. So again, having that, it's at the same time, it's both a wider view and it's also a smaller view because it's noticing the small things, right? Can really be helpful. But just so for earned secure attachment, yes, we've got the stable person who is there, who is available to be the secure attachment figure, right? And that is not always as easy as you might think. And I think all of us parents, or just speaking for myself, I walked into this 100% ready to be that stable person who my son could form a secure attachment with. And yeah, I know it's going to be hard, but I got this, whatever. I don't think I was also always the most stable person for him to attach to during those early years, because I was pretty thrown by a lot of the stuff that was going on, right? And so part of my job when I'm working with a family is to provide support to the parent so that the parent can be that stable person that the kid can attach to. And then there's time, right? And if we think about when we were looking at what kind of caregiver helps us develop secure attachment, consistently attuned, responsive, and reliable, right? So that's what we need to be able to be, is to be attuned to how is our kid feeling. So in a moment when a kid is like legitimately distressed, we don't jump in with, joking or poking fun at them, right? We treat that seriously. At another point, when a kid is just like a little bit, mopey about something, we might be able to jump in with being jokey and playful, and we might get them out of that mood a little bit, but we're attuned to what they need and we respond to those emotions. And being consistently responsive, like when they have a need, meeting it. And this, a lot of times, I'm gonna pull us into a slightly different direction, but their needs don't always seem developmentally appropriate, right? We've got a 16-year-old who, needs help with something that usually you don't have to help kids with past the age of 7 or something, right? Well, if that's what your kid needs, you got to be responsive to that need, right? So really meeting their needs, being reliable, being consistently attuned. And then it is easier to wire up a brand new little baby brain to have a secure attachment than it is to unwire and rewire a teenage brain or a 10-year-old brain into having secure attachment. So again, it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take longer than you think it's going to take. But if you continue to be that attuned, responsive, reliable parent, again, no one is asking for 100% perfection. That is impossible. It's not going to happen. There's studies that say like 33% of the time, caregivers, if caregivers are attuned and responsive 33% of the time, you wind up with secure attachment. So don't kick yourself if you make a mistake here, but as much as possible, be that attuned, responsive, reliable adult. Building felt safety, right? Really helping kids feel safe in your presence. That again, also a whole other training, but doing these things consistently over time, and then helping that kid, and this probably, we talk about doing life books, right? That's one way that we help kids make sense of what happened to them and tell a coherent story about their lives. If there's any other kinds of activities, whether it's with a therapist or just at home with the parents, kind of making sense of their life and being able to tell that story, that also helps move them towards a secure attachment. Boop. There we go.
This may be off the beaten path, but you were talking about the ladders, and I'm assuming that was used as a tool for you guys to be able to establish that this had happened, right? Right? So I was wondering if that same tool could be used as a tool with parents to help them, kind of think about it in an up the ladder kind of way,
So yeah, that is actually a very good point, Chester. And we haven't, as a actual, policy and procedure, formalized a way of doing that, but I will probably now go back to my team and figure out a way to do that, because I do think it's really important. Now there is that self-assessment piece. And so we do talk with people about part of that is helping you recognize the progress that you have made over time, right? Is like looking again. We do it every 6 months with like the treatment planning process. But yeah, having a way of showing parents also, look, when you first came, here's where you were, right? You could not make heads or tails of your kid's behavior. And you were like, I don't know what's going on with this kid. And over the time that we've worked together, just the other day, you came in and said to me, well, she screamed at me when she got home from school, but I think it was because, she was feeling bad about this or something. Look at how far you've come and being able to understand where that behavior comes from. Great. Good idea, Chester.
We have time for one more question before we need to close out. Anyone else?
All right. Well, thank you everyone so much for spending this time with me and for your questions and stories and participation. And I will get these slides into the AFF-CNY website, so you'll be able to access them later. And thank you. It was a